All right, this is Chris Cardwell. We're here on behalf of the Nashville Bar Association's Legal History Project, and we're going to take the oral history of Gareth Aden. Mr. Aden, would you state your name for the record, please?
Gareth Smythe Aden.
And just going to ask a few background questions, let the future viewers know a little bit about who you are and where you come from. Where were you born and when?
I was born Christmas Day, 1944, in Duke University Hospital in Durham, North Carolina.
And, we're here in Nashville. When did your family make it to Nashville?
My dad was an English professor, and after he had gotten his various degrees at North Carolina and Georgia Tech, he got a job in Danville, Kentucky at Center College. And I went first through third grades there in Danville. And then we came to Nashville in about 1954.
And I believe your father, at some point in time, towards the end of his career, was a professor at Vanderbilt?
That's right. That was why we came to Nashville in 1954, was he had gotten a professorship there and stayed at Vanderbilt the rest of his career.
Man, what were your folks' names?
My father was John Michael Aden, known by Jack, and my mother was Marie Schwab Aden.
Did your mom work?
My mom never worked outside the home. She was a mother and housewife.
Were there any other lawyers in your family?
None.
Your father being a professor, did he steer you towards law school or towards advanced degrees after college?
Not at all. He was very interested in my education and played a big part in, for instance, where I went to high school and college. But my plan had been to go into journalism. And the advice I received when I was graduating from undergraduate school was that the way to get ahead was to go to law school rather than journalism school, because I was already a writer. And that's what happened.
So we know that you were born in Durham, made your way through Center College, or Century as we called it, got down to Nashville. Where did you spend most of your time growing up?
I spent most of my time at Aden Elementary School, right there on good old Fairfax in Nashville. That was my stomping grounds. Then after Aden, I spent 2 years next door at Cavert Junior High School. And then one summer after my 8th grade year, my dad called me into his office and said, "You're going to go to a new school next year." And I said, "Oh, really?" And he said, "Yeah, I'm going to send you to MBA, Montgomery Bell Academy."
Had you ever even heard of Montgomery Bell Academy at that time?
I had heard the name, and I knew enough to ask, "Is that the school with the cannons in the front yard?" And he said, "Yes, that's the one." And that began my career at MBA.
How was your MBA experience?
Probably the best thing that my dad ever gave me was the opportunity to go to MBA. I think it made a huge difference in my life. It was a much stricter school than anything I had been used to. The teachers were outstanding, and I was there by good fortune with a lot of other young men who wanted to learn. And that was an intense 4 years just learning.
Any folks that are practicing law in Nashville now or in the not too recent or not too distant past that were in your classes at MBA?
Yeah, there were some hoodlums like Alan Lentz who went to MBA, and a lot of other folks. Charlie Ray, Bill Osier, who have remained friends of mine for years. Rob Orr was in our class, and yes, a lot of people who practice law. Or Mike Doyle became a doctor. It's hard to believe Mike became a doctor, but he did. And it was, in a nutshell, Chris, it was a really good experience.
Now, you and I have been working together for about 17 years now, I think, which is hard to believe. But one of the first things I learned at Gullett was that your nickname was the Chief. Did you have any nicknames growing up in MBA?
Well, I think the Chief was the nickname that everybody Well, you remember I came from a public school, sort of, at that time, I guess you would say, in the inner city to MBA. So Charlie Ray told me once I had inflammation of the clodaceous glands, and it took me about a week to figure out he'd call me a clod. But but no, I didn't have any. I don't think I had any nicknames.
Are you sure about that answer, sir?
Well, there was a name that somebody had given me for the annual my senior year, but I can't remember what it was. Probably had to do with the fact that I did a lot of work in original declamation for Ms.
I'll show you.
One of our teachers.
Maybe a flashback from the annual, sir, and ask you if that reminds you what maybe a nickname you had in high school was.
Yes, I can see that Alan Lentz has been helping you. I was the silver-tongued devil at MBA because I did a lot of forensic work there, and I was in the American Legion speech contest and had some luck in that. But yes, I was the speech giver.
Did you play any sports in NBA?
Yeah. Not with any success until my senior year. I tried football my freshman year and didn't do very well. Tried out for varsity both my sophomore and my junior years and didn't make it and ended up playing junior varsity for those 2 years. But my senior year, things sort of changed. I think I got some self-confidence, and I was second string all-city.
In football?
In football at NBA.
You learn a lot of good life lessons playing high school football.
Oh, I mean, you hear the old saying that the other guy puts on his britches just the same way you do. Well, it finally dawned on me what that meant in my senior year, and I got a lot of confidence and enjoyed playing a lot. I wish I'd played in college, but that wasn't to be.
Well, that's a nice segue into the next thing I wanted to talk about, college. Obviously, your father was an English professor, so you probably knew a thing or two, or probably had a leg up on choosing from colleges that a lot of folks don't have. Where did you consider going and why?
Well, I didn't really have a great deal to say with it. My dad was the ultimate scholar, and he brought me a list, I think, finally, of four colleges. And Washington and Lee was on there, Davidson, small school, I think maybe Oberlin, and one other. And after talking to some of my friends at school at MBA, I found out they were going on to Washington and Lee, so that's the one I told him I prefer. And he said that's a good choice.
Let me go back just 1 second before I get into college. Did you have any jobs while you were in high school, anything of note that was interesting?
Well, I worked for 2 summers in high school and 1 summer in college at the Easter Seal camp on Old Hickory Lake as a counselor, and those were great summers. That's where I met Bob Brandt, who is a judge here in Nashville, now retired, and a very good friend of mine. But it was a great experience. I did some other, had a paper route. I did 17th and 18th Avenues. I knew them like the back of my hand, delivering papers there.
Oh, paper route, that's when you hit send on the email and everybody gets an electronic copy of the paper?
No, that's when you pick up your big cotton bags, load them full of newspapers, and carry them over to 17th Avenue and throw them in people's yards.
All right, yeah. So tell me about WNL. You get there, is good experience?
WNL was a great experience. At that time, WNL was an all-male college, and it was everything that it was cracked up to be in terms of a party school. I mean, I probably didn't study much at all my freshman year, but I had a great time. And it was there with Mike Hash. Mike was my roommate at WNL and had been a friend of mine through church all the way since I had been in Nashville. So this was good. He was there with me. Mike became the executive director of the National Hospital Association in Washington, D.C., and is one of the primary authors of Obamacare.
Oh.
Yeah.
Socially, were you a member of any groups, clubs, fraternities?
I was a KA. My dad had been a KA, and I think he must have put in a good word for me. So
It's the Alpha
they
chapter.
let me in. It's the Alpha chapter, exactly.
Do you stay in touch with any of your old fraternity brothers?
You know what? Of course, I stay in touch with Mike. I mean, I
Yeah.
see him pretty regularly when he visits here, when we go up to Washington, D.C. But I went back to my 50th college reunion, even though I didn't graduate from WNL,
Yeah.
and saw a lot of the guys. And this was about 2 months ago, and I really had a good time.
Did MBA do a good job of preparing you for WNL, which is an excellent college?
Chris, I'll be honest with you. I think I learned more at MBA than I ever learned either at law school or in college. I could have gone, I did go 1 year literally almost without opening a book. The education was that good. Finally, I got a letter from Dad, and he says, "What's this with the grades?" And so I started back to studying.
You said just a second ago that you didn't finish it at WNL.
Yeah.
Where did you go, and what caused the change?
Julia Whaley, we had known each other and dated some in high school, and then dated even more in college. And she worked at Easter Seal Camp. And she and I decided we wanted to get married, and so I could come back and go to Vanderbilt free. And I decided in my junior year to go ahead and come back to Vanderbilt and take advantage of no tuition to go to school. So that's what I did, and I finished up my last year and a half at Vanderbilt.
Now, was Julia from Chattanooga?
No, she's from Nashville. She went to Palmer School and then went to Salem
Okay.
in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Yeah, she's
I've
a
al-
Nashville girl.
I've always thought it was a great story that one of your good friends went on a few dates with her in high school.
Yes, and you probably know him. She was an Episcopalian, the same way that I was, and yeah, exactly.
And we're talking about Richie Hines.
Richie Hines, who's a
great
fine lawyer
railroad
from
lawyer.
Atlanta. Uh-huh.
So you and Julie got married after your sophomore year.
We got married midway in my junior year
Okay.
of college, and that's when I came back and went to Vandy because Dad taught there, and I could go free under the agreement.
Where did Julia go to college?
She went to Salem
Okay.
College in Winston-Salem. She didn't finish up.
What was your major in college?
I didn't have one at Washington and Lee. At that time, at that school, if you had a certain grade point average, you could write your own ticket. That is to say, you could make out your own curriculum. It was sort of a free major. And I just love liberal arts. I like, literature. I like political science, history. And so that was the course that I charted. I also took Latin because I didn't have to take math. And so I'd taken 4 years of Latin at MBA, and I took 2 more years of Latin at WNL.
And when you came to Vanderbilt, you had to have a major, didn't you?
Yes. I also had to take freshman math as a senior. It was terrifying. But I made it through.
What was your major at Vanderbilt?
I think my major at Vanderbilt was, it was English, with probably a minor in political science.
It sounds like you had 2 different college experiences, one going off young man to WNL, then another coming back married to Vanderbilt for the last semester and a half, or year and a half.
Life got very serious, as I found out. Once you get married, you have to really look to the future then. You can't just enjoy having a good time. It's time to get serious.
Was Julia working at this time?
She worked. She worked, as a matter of fact, I think for WSM, and worked for about 2 or 3 years, and then we had children come in, and so she became a housewife.
And where did you live?
Oh gosh, we had a number of places. We lived at Ashwood Terrace Apartments on Ashwood Avenue for a while, which was kind of near where I had grown up, and then we had a home that we leased on Fairfax. No, it was on Natchez Trace, and several places before we finally bought a home. But that was after I graduated from law school and had a little money.
Well, I was talking about, well, you were in college and married. Where were you and Julia living?
In Ashwood Terrace, and then at the house that we leased for a while.
So you must have had a job.
Oh yeah, I had several jobs.
What were you doing?
Well, I was working for the Nashville Banner and really enjoyed writing for the Banner for about a year and a half or 2 years. Then I worked, I got very lucky, and somebody recommended me to Howard Wharf, who was Commissioner of Education, and I got the job for a couple of years of editing the magazine for the Tennessee Department of Education while I was in college and then in law school. And then I began writing for my old teacher at MBA, Tupper Saucy. He asked me to write for the Nashville magazine. And I was writing for the Nashville magazine in my second year, at the end of my second year in law school, when I went to pick up my paycheck and there was a note on the door that the Nashville magazine had closed. And that was not good news.
How were your grades in Vanderbilt?
My grades at Vanderbilt were good. I mean, when I say good, I think it was a B plus average and through there.
And you touched on this a bit earlier. What motivated you to go to law school with no lawyers in your family?
While I was writing for the newspaper and then later editing, and I enjoyed the work editing the magazine because I was a writer, editor, and I had a staff. I had artists that helped put the magazine together. I just loved it. And I kind of wanted to work for Time magazine. Back in those days, Time was the cock of the walk of magazines in the United States. And I remember I went to Florida to I think the St. Pete Times, talking about a job down there. And the editor, who was really a fine journalist, said, look, he said, you know how to write. He said, you don't need to go to journalism school. He said, what you need to do is, if you want to get ahead, and if you like editing, he said, you need to go to law school. And I thought that was a novel idea. He sort of talked to me about the difference in pay. And so, after thinking about it some, Chris, I decided that I would spend 3 years of my life and go to law school to help me get ahead in journalism.
What did your new wife think about you waiting 3 more years before you went out and started earning a real paycheck?
She was good with it. You know, we were young and we were just starting out, and that was fine with her.
When was your oldest child born?
Let's see, I believe, golly, years. It would have been about 70, 71, and through there. And my oldest child is Spencer.
Right.
And Spencer now lives here in Nashville, and it is a computer geek and manager of platforms at HealthStream, which is a Frist company that does computer work for hospitals.
So he would have been born while you were still at undergrad at Vanderbilt.
Yeah.
How many children do you and Julia have?
2. Our second child was Erica, and Erica was born a couple of years later, and she is also now living in Nashville. And she has 2 children, both of whom are in either high school or grade school here in town. And then Spencer has 2 children who one is in college and the other one is out working. So we have 4 grandchildren, and that's neat. That's good.
Now, are all the grandchildren here in Nashville also?
No. Joshua, Spencer's oldest, is here in Nashville, and then Kelly Ann, his younger daughter, is at Columbia in Chicago, and she wants to get into movies or video, and that's why she's at Columbia.
Now, back to starting law school, it's kind of odd. Most people talk about they had a professor or a family member that pushed them to law school. For you, it was this guy in St. Pete that gave you some career advice. Did you just take him at his word, or did you go back and bounce this idea off some folks and see if he was shooting straight with you?
I did. And everybody said that he was basically right. He said you will automatically up your pay grade 2, 3, 4 slots. And and he also, everybody pointed out that knowing something about the law is important in both writing and editing. So that seemed to be good advice.
What schools did you consider?
None other than Vandy, because I could go to Vanderbilt virtually free.
Oh, still in law school.
Yes, yes.
Makes it a lot easier to pay the rent and raise a baby.
And it played a part in what you're asking is why. Mm-hmm. You know, it was not like it was a tremendous financial sacrifice to go to law school. It would have been if I'd had to pay, but.
Any of your law school professors stand out to you?
Well, I would say probably Dean Wade was my favorite at Vanderbilt Law School. He was the dean of the school and known for being one of the experts on torts in the United States. Carl Warden was a teacher of criminal procedure and criminal law, and I liked him a lot. Jim Neal was sort of an attached professor. He was a famous lawyer from here in Nashville, and he also taught there, and I enjoyed his class a lot.
And I guess I assume you continued to work in law school. Was that still with the Nashville magazine?
It was with the Nashville magazine. I think that I had still worked a little bit my first year as editor of the Department of Education magazine for the state. But those were the main jobs that I had while I was in law school. One of the deans told me, I think it was Dean Beasley, he said, you know, Gareth, you can't work while you're in law school. It's too intense. And I told him I needed to work.
Did you work for any firms during the summers?
No, I didn't. I just continued to do the jobs that I was doing in journalism until the Nashville magazine suddenly closed up, and I was pretty despondent because I needed a job, and I hated not writing for the Nashville magazine. It was absolutely the best job in the world because I could write about anything I wanted to in Nashville. But I was grousing around, kind of moping after criminal procedure class with Jim Neal one day, and he said, "What's wrong?" And I said, I lost my job that I really need to have, and I don't know what I'm going to do because I really need to make some money. And he was very nice. He said, we won't pay you beans, but he said, I'm up at Cornelius Collins, Higgins and Neal, or maybe it was Neal and Higgins. And he said, you can come up there and clerk for a while, and you know, we won't pay you a lot, but at least it'll keep food on the table. And I thought that was great. I really appreciated it, and that changed everything.
I want to ask you about that. What that first experience working in a law firm, what was that like for you?
Well, I didn't really like law school. I had never liked law school for the first 2 years. It seemed to me very dry. Your writing obviously didn't give you the creative exposure that you'd like to have, and I was not at all infatuated with the idea of practicing law. But then when I went to a law firm and got assigned cases to work on, got to interview witnesses, got to then kind of watch how the case progressed toward trial, and working with Jim Neal and Aubrey Harwell and some of the people at that office, all of a sudden I began to see what this was all about. It wasn't just a lot of stop signs. It was a way that you could help people. And that made me begin to rethink what I was going to do.
Now, this whole time between college and law school, what year did you started W&L in 62?
Right, I graduated from college in 66, began in 62, and then I went to law school from 66 through 69.
So there was what was going on in America at that time? That was kind of the start and midpoint of Vietnam?
That's right, that's right. you remember certain things, like I remember the day at Washington and Lee when President Kennedy was assassinated. You never forget that day and how you heard it. And then Vietnam became a really major issue in the United States during my law school period.
Were you politically active, putting
No.
flowers in your hair or pro-war?
No.
Neither.
As I told you, Chris, once you get married and then you start having a family, you get really serious. So I was I had something to do just about every minute of the day.
Which is the next thing I was gonna, kind of in the same vein. When you're a full-time student, you're working these two jobs, you've got a young baby at home. What did you and Julia do for fun when you were in law school?
I remember we took one trip to Florida. I think my parents maybe kept Joshua, but other than that, we just enjoyed life pretty much here in Nashville. We just had a good time. We weren't worried about it. Everything was in the future. You're looking ahead.
At that time that you started at the Cornelius firm clerking, did you know any other lawyers at that time?
Not really. I knew some through church. I'd grown up at Christ Church, which is Christ Church Cathedral, the Episcopal Church downtown. And I knew, some lawyers through that. I knew that my friend Bob Brandt had decided to go to law school, and he was 2 years ahead of me, I think, at Vanderbilt, maybe 3. But I really didn't. I made a good friend in law school, Harlan Dodson III, and he and I both loved canoeing, and we'd take canoe trips all over Tennessee together. And I think it was at the beginning of my last semester, he said, "What are you going to do when you graduate?" And I said, "I'm not sure, but I know I got to start going around town and talking. I'm kind of thinking about practicing law rather than going into journalism. And if I'm going to practice, I need to, talk to people and try to get a job." And he said, "Well, why don't you just come on down and practice at my dad's office with me?" And I didn't know anything about his dad's office or anything, but I said, "Well, gee, that'd be great." As it turned out, that was one of the luckiest moments of my life.
And what was the name of that firm?
Hooker, Keeble, Dodson, and Harris.
Did you ever consider staying on with Jim Neal at the Cornelius firm?
Not really. That was a job that, they offered me to kind of help me get through, and I enjoyed my work there. I enjoyed working with Jim Neal and Aubrey Harwell and the other lawyers there. But I think that probably, Chris, that was a short-term item that was probably began several months before I talked to Harlan. And after I talked to Harlan, and he said, "I'm going to talk to my dad and see if they'll take you as well as me in." And he came back and said, yes, they would. Then I think that my mind was made up on what I was going to do.
Well, one thing I'm curious about, here's this guy who went to law school to be a journalist.
Yeah.
And, 2/3 of the way through your, journey through law school, you wind up deciding that, man, maybe I'll be a lawyer. Maybe that's going to be my life's work. How do you, when you showed up in that law firm the first day to work, and you worked those next months, did you feel like law school had prepared you for that, or?
You talk about after I graduated?
No, well, I'm talking about. Well, let's start when you were clerking.
Yeah, I thought it had. It was the first time law made any sense, because it had just been a dry process that I realize now was changing my brain. It changed the way I thought about things, but I didn't know it at the time. But this made law real. I mean, I got to see it working in action and how it can make a difference. And I think also the fact that I'd done some oratory work and the prospect maybe of trial law began to interest me, because that firm, just like Hooker, Keeble, Dodson, and Harris, was primarily a trial law outfit.
Some big-time historic Nashville lawyers in that firm.
Very much so. I mean, probably as good an office as any young lawyer could go to. There was John Hooker Sr., who was the sort of the dean of trial lawyers, along with Jack Norman in Nashville. David Keeble had some of the best clients in Nashville as clients. Was not so much a trial lawyer as Mr. Hooker, but he was very good. And then Harlan Dodson, who was a powerhouse, he knew everybody in government, he knew all the judges very well, and a wonderful man. And then Tyree Harris, who I got to know as another just consummate trial lawyer.
Now, was it the same as it is now? You took the bar exam some months after you graduated from law school?
Right. I took the bar exam. I went with some of my classmates to the University of Tennessee and took one of the very first of the bar preparation courses, and then I came back and took the bar, and I was worried about it, and I had already started working at the firm, and my wife and I were invited to Mr. Hooker's beautiful farm, and we were out by his pool, and he said, "Well, what have you heard from the bar?" And I said, "I haven't heard anything yet. I don't know when they're going to come out." And he said, "Let me go do some checking." And he wandered down to the pool room where they had a phone, came back in a few minutes with a big smile. He said, "I don't think I'd worry about it too much." So I think he called Shep Tate.
What was your starting salary at this firm?
I think it was 11,000.
About what we pay our first-year associates now.
Yeah, good luck. But that was a pretty good salary in those days to get started on.
And that was one of the biggest firms in town back then, wasn't it?
It actually was. I think the biggest firm was Bass, Berry and Sims, and when I started, Charlie Ray and Bill Osier went to Bass, Berry, and they at that time had 7 or 8 lawyers. So they were probably the biggest. But, we had 5 or 6. John Kelly was with Hooker Keeble, wonderful lawyer, wonderful person. And then young Harlan, the third.
Tell me about, I think your first trial was with John Hooker Sr., wasn't it?
The first trial I ever attended was with Mr. Hooker, and it was a murder trial in McMinnville, Warren County. I was at the very end of the counsel table.
This is, I'm going to lead the witness. This is one of my favorite stories.
Yeah.
So if you would, and this is something people need to hear, share the story about Mr. Hooker's cross-examination of that gentleman, please.
Our client was the defendant, and he was charged with shooting his wife at an encounter on the roadside. And his defense was that it was just a happenstance meeting and a happenstance event where they got mad at each other, and the trigger happened to get pulled in the tussle. But suddenly during the trial, the state's attorney called a witness to the stand who said basically that she was the wife of the man that our defendant's wife was dating. And this wasn't good. And then she proceeded to testify that the defendant had called her and said, "We need to talk." He came by and picked her up. They drove around and they talked about the problem of their mutual spouses dating each other and seeing each other. And then she said, "We got back home," and he opened the door. I was going to get out. And the Attorney General said, "Well, what happened?" And she said, "Well, he reached down under the seat and pulled a revolver out just a little bit and said, if we can't solve this ourselves, I think I know how I can solve it," and pushed the revolver back under his seat. And Chris, you could have heard a pin drop. I mean, this was terrible testimony for the defense because it was premeditation for murder. And then the Attorney General asked, "Well, what happened then?" And she answered, "Well, he reached over to kiss me." So now not only did you have premeditation, but you had our guy being a scoundrel also. And I wanted to be in Thailand. I just wanted to be anywhere but in that courtroom. There was utter silence. And I remember seeing some movement at Mr. Hooker's end he was at the number 1 seat. Bernard Smith and Larry Stanley were also trying it with us. And Mr. Hooker got up out of the seat right away, almost before the district attorney sat down and said, "Well, young lady, did he kiss ya?" And the whole courtroom burst into laughter. There was so much tension that just by asking that question the way he asked it, everybody laughed, and she said, "Well, yes." And he said, "Well, good. Now let's get on to something important." And I've thought during my legal career in the 50 years since, that is the perfect example of a lawyer thinking and knowing what to do. I never would have done it. I wouldn't have had the ability to think that quickly.
And this is back when people came and watched trials. This was
Oh, the courtroom was packed. They let school out for this trial. Yeah, this was big, big.
What was the result?
Voluntary manslaughter.
Wow.
Yeah.
Save that guy.
Pretty good outcome.
Now, tell me, obviously every day as a young associate wasn't, sitting in these trials of the century. What were you doing as a young associate back in the late 60s, early 70s?
I did, for about a year and a half, I followed Mr. Hooker around. I would go out to his house in the morning. He might have a motion or a trial in Columbia, and Minnie would cook a big breakfast for us, and then I'd go out and get the car and bring it around and drive him to wherever. It was great. I mean, I had literally the dream life. I got to watch one of the best lawyers in Tennessee for about a year and a half, and also I got files that I did collection work and things like that. But in December of I guess it was 1970, right after we had our big Christmas party, Mr. Hooker that night, I got a call the next morning. He passed away, and of course that was tragic. I'd give anything to have had more time with him. But the result was, Chris, that when we next opened our office, I came in that morning, and in my little office there was a stack of files about that high on my desk, and they had gone through all of Mr. Hooker's files and divvied them out, and those were mine to handle. And there were death cases in there. I mean, so I really, at that point, I had to get in the water and swim.
So you've got about a year and a half of experience. Your mentor passes, and then you've got to go. It's on. You got to go be a lawyer.
You got to go do it. And of course, I will say this: that it was a small office, very supportive. And when I had a question, I had 3 or 4 of the best lawyers in Tennessee to go ask questions of, and they would help.
Where were those offices?
We were in the Nashville Bank and Trust building.
Is that still standing?
It is. It's now that niche hotel that's up there on I guess it's Dedrick.
Okay.
Yeah, it's right across from what used to be Regions Bank.
Gotcha.
Right there. Yeah, it was there for 15 years or so.
How long did you stay at the Hooker firm?
I stayed there till about 1986 or 87.
And what was the name? You were a partner there. What was the name of the firm when you left?
Well, the last couple of years I was a partner. It was when I left. It was Dodson, Harris, Robinson, Mac Robinson, and Aden. But generally, during most of my time there, it kept the name Hooker, Keeble, Dodson, and Harris.
Tell me about some of your favorite cases some of the most memorable cases you had in that point of your career.
Well, I guess the first case the big case that I tried on my own was the Cecil Corley motor case. Cecil Corley was a Pontiac dealer here in Middle Tennessee, and he was hard to get along with. And Mr. Dodson, I think, thought that maybe I could take care of Cecil, and he sent him to me, and he talked about maldistribution. He had a Pontiac dealership, but more cars were being received by the Hartsville dealer than him, who was in Gallatin, a larger city. and he thought that he had a complaint. So I was just young enough and brash enough to file suit in federal court for breach of contract. And I think that we decided to add the Robinson-Patman count too in the case. And Clore Morton drew the lawsuit. He was new in Nashville, and he gave me about 2.5 years of intense grooming for how you try a lawsuit. He was a great judge and a rule stickler. And I learned federal practice under Clore Morton's tutelage, because he would jump on you if you didn't follow the rules and weren't prepared. And we tried the case, got a good verdict. I mean, in those days, I think it was about $270,000, which, in those days was a big verdict. But Judge Morton took it away because we hadn't proved our profits in net form. And that was kind of a bitter pill to swallow, but I realize now he was right, and he taught me a lesson that if you're going to have a commercial case, profit's not the issue, it's net profit that's the issue. And the good news is we settled it because I don't think General Motors wanted that case on the books.
One of the stories I've heard you tell over the years is the first Greyhound case you tried.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, this wasn't the first.
Okay.
But it was one of the cases we tried. I think we were trying it in Centerville. It was in a way, it was embarrassing, but it was also has a humorous aspect. We tried it for a couple of days. We were getting ready to send it to the jury, and the judge thought it ought to be settled, and he said, "Why don't you guys go out one more time and talk about settlement?" And so we did, and we got into a room by ourselves there in the courthouse, and my opponent said, "Well, Gareth, what can you offer? Let's not make this drawn out." And I had already checked with my insurance company for Greyhound, and I knew that the top that I could pay was $70,000. It was a serious injury. And so my answer to him was this, $70,000, because we had already been talking about, I think, 30 or 40 or something like that. And he said, okay, and he went off and talked to his client, and he came back and said, "All right, we've got it settled. I'll take your $52,000. So we did settle it.
Okay. I was actually thinking about a different Greyhound case. I was thinking the one you tried in church.
Oh yeah. That was my first Greyhound jury trial.
Yeah.
And I drove to Camden to try it. It was a wrongful death case, and I showed up down there, and for some reason the courthouse in Camden was boarded up. And I went around town, and they said, the clerk's office is over here. So I went and found a building with the circuit court clerk's office and went inside, and they said, "Oh yeah, we're trying our cases in," I think it was either the Methodist or the Baptist church on the square. And so I tried my first wrongful death case for Greyhound in a church.
Did they put the jury in the choir seats?
That's where, I think it was in the choir seats.
Any other interesting, noteworthy cases while you were at the Hooker firm that you'd like to talk about?
Oh, golly. We tried, Charlie Williams and I teamed up, and Charlie and I had been friends in law school, and I just loved him. He was a really good lawyer, very aggressive, and he liked to do plaintiff's work, but he hadn't had much experience in federal court. And it seemed like every case that I'd drawn ended up in Judge Morton's court over there. So Charlie asked me to help a boat dealer in Gallatin who had been terminated by the Mercury Marine Division of Brunswick Corporation, just with a letter. He'd been a boat dealer for years. And Charlie and I looked at his agreement, and it didn't help at all. And then we noticed that the agreement called for Wisconsin law. So we went and checked on Wisconsin law, and Wisconsin had passed a Dealer Day in Court Act. And that act required you to give 60 days notice to a dealer before termination, tell them what they were doing wrong, and give them a chance to cure. So we filed suit. Judge Morton decided that this was substantive law and that therefore Tennessee law should apply and dismiss the case. and it went to we appealed it to the Sixth Circuit, and they reversed Judge Morton and cited one of his own rulings to him in the reversal. When we got back and had our first hearing, Judge Morton said, "Well, boys," he said, "I guess I was wrong. They cited my own ruling to me when they reversed me." But I did like Judge Morton, and we ended up trying the case and got a good result for our dealer. And then I got a call from Boattown, USA in Fort Lauderdale, and went to Fort Lauderdale and tried a second of those cases for Boattown in Fort Lauderdale.
What was, everybody knows that lawyers work pretty hard these days. What was the workday like when you were at the Hooker firm?
Hooker firm, it was. I don't think it's much different than it is now, Chris, honestly. I mean, the difference probably is the speed of communication. I mean, in those days, you'd either pick up the phone and try to call somebody, or you'd write a letter. And when you picked up your file, the correspondence section was huge because you had all these typed letters. And so that's really the only difference. It's not that much difference in going into the office and what we work on. You'd research, talk to witnesses, take depositions, go to court.
The bar was a lot smaller back then.
Much smaller.
More collegial, or was it just smaller?
Nashville has been fortunate, I think, having practiced around in a number of cities. I think we have a great bar, and I think we have a very collegial bar where lawyers generally show respect for one another. But it was probably more collegial because people knew each other. I mean, when I joined the bar, there were probably, I think my number was in the 2000s. Gosh, now they're up at the 30,000s. And you knew people. You knew everybody generally you tried a case with, and every time you had a case, you met somebody probably knew or that you already knew, and that changed within probably 10 years.
I'm going to move on to late 80s when you came from the Hooker firm to Gullett, where you've been ever since. Before I do that, anything else you want to talk about at the Hooker firm, or what life was like back then?
I don't think so. It was just a very special place and a wonderful firm with wonderful people involved. But the firm finally decided to dissolve on its own after David Keeble passed away. And I was looking for a good place to land and wrote a couple of letters to law firms here in town and got a letter back from Val Sanford saying, "We'd like to talk with you." I didn't really know that much about Gullett Sanford, but I went by and talked to Val and told him that I had a young man, Scott Derrick, that would also need a job because the firm was dissolving, and Val was kind enough to say, "We can take you both in." And that was the beginning of another. That was a great decision because this has been a great firm to practice with.
Well, I'm going to go back a little bit in time. Then you talk about Scott. Did you have any dedicated associates or any young lawyers that you mentored at the Hooker firm?
Scott Derrick and Jerry Lee were probably my best young friends. They were both at the Hooker firm, but we really didn't have a mentor system. You just got young lawyers in, and everybody grabbed as much of their time as you could. It wasn't nearly as formal as it is these days.
How was when you came to? I'm sorry. What year did you come to Gullett?
I think it was 86 or 87.
How was the culture at Gullett Sanford? How did the culture at Gullett Sanford compare to the culture at the Hooker firm?
I think the main difference was that it was a larger outfit. At that time, probably the Gullett firm had about 18 maybe lawyers. That's a whole lot more than I ever practiced with. And it had a broader practice. For instance, it had lawyers who did more than just trial work. Now, Harlan Dodson had been a fine probate lawyer, a big Harlan, and he basically changed his practice in the later years to a probate practice on his own, and was one of the preeminent probate lawyers his last years that I was with him. But this firm had it had a corporate bankruptcy section. It had a business section. It had a probate section with Jack Robinson. So for the first time in my life, I was with a firm that had a lot of different lawyers that do a lot of different type things, and it was fun.
How you were working on a lot of commercial type cases back at the Hooker firm, and also some criminal defense and a little bit of personal injury. How did your practice change when you got to Gullett?
Well, in a way, it changed a lot. I kept doing the commercial work for the first 2 or 3 or 4 years because that's what I had made my living on. And I remember that Charlie Williams got me involved for Justice Steele in the Memphis jail case. And Justice Steele had the contract to put in all the ornamental steel at the huge criminal justice center in Memphis, and it turned out to be a disaster. The reason was that in Memphis, if this was downtown and they had no place to store material. And here you have literally 1 million pieces of steel that has to be fabricated in San Antonio, Texas, and sent to Memphis and erected by my client in the jail. And the only way they could do it was we worked out a contract where they would send the pieces of steel as we ordered them. And so my client spent an enormous amount of time, and one of the first uses of a computer in a case I can remember, actually figuring out what pieces of steel they needed when. And the problem was that that's not the way you make money fabricating steel. You make all the twosies first, then you make the threesies, then you make the foursies. And they didn't prepare, and so consequently what began happening was truckloads of steel began arriving, and there was no place to store it. It was piled on top of each other. And you know about construction. If you can't do it efficiently, you lose your shirt. And Justice Steele had taken a tremendous loss.
You and Charlie Williams tried that case, didn't you?
We went to, it was a race to court. We filed suit here in Nashville in federal court, and they filed suit in state court in San Antonio, and they won the race to get their case set first in San Antonio.
It's the last thing they won, isn't it?
Well, you know, we thought it was bad. And Charlie and I went and got on a plane and flew to San Antonio and got us a little hotel room there and set up shop. And none of the judges in Bexar County wanted to handle the case, so they brought a judge, an older judge who was a wonderful judge out of retirement. And he tried the case, did a terrific job, and we got close to $1 million in that case. They appealed. We needed an appellate lawyer and went to the best San Antonio appellate lawyer we could find. And he said, I'll tell you what's going to happen. And we said, what do you mean? He said, this is what's going to happen on appeal. He said, the Court of Appeals is going to reverse and take your judgment away. And he said, we'll appeal it to the Supreme Court and they'll reinstate it. And he was right on the money. The only sad thing is, Chris, that in the meantime, Justice Steele could not withstand the loss. And so by the time about the time we were paid in the case, Justice Steele was out of business. Yeah, but we tried it between Thanksgiving and Christmas. We came back to Nashville the day before Christmas. We didn't need a plane. We could have flown on our own. We were happy.
What year was this?
Oh gosh, this would have been in the early, the early '80s.
Well, that's about the time there was a change in your career at some point when you started doing railroad work.
Well, that happened actually. That I had done some railroad cases at Hooker Keeble and enjoyed it, but it was primarily Tyree Harris's ball game there. And after our firm broke up, after I'd been at Gullett and Sanford for about 2 years, maybe 3, I got a phone call from Mike Aden with what at that time was the L&N or Family Lines. And Mike said, Tyree's retiring. would you like to do some railroad work? And it took me all of about 2 seconds to say, yeah, sure I would. And that then became pretty much my career over the next 25 years. I really enjoyed it.
Other than the Justice Steele case, any cases, any other cases you want to talk about that noteworthy trials you've had here at Gullett?
Well, one that I'm really proud of was representing Harlan Electric in the arena case. They had a real problem with the arena, similar to the one they'd had with the jail, of just poor planning and poor execution of the contract. And we represented Harlan Electric, who had taken a huge loss because they were a finished contractor. That is to say, their work came late in the project. The mayor would not grant an extension. And it was going to be I think a $75,000 a day penalty.
Was that Mayor Bredesen?
That was Mayor Bredesen. But he had granted one extension. And so Harlan Electric had to literally throw manpower at the job and took a tremendous loss. Close to $1 million of loss. We filed suit against the prime contractor. Prime contractor filed suit against the steel supplier, steel manufacturer, and so we had a three-way lawsuit. We convinced the judge that we should be the plaintiff in the case, which made all the difference. We got to open the proof, and we got to explain what happened and why we took a loss and the fact that it wasn't our fault. Tried over 3.5 weeks. The jury was out 4 days and brought back a $1.8 million verdict for Harlan Electric. And because we could recover our costs, we ended up recovering about $3 million. And I was proud of that case. That was a case I worked hard on. Construction cases are hard because juries don't really understand how you make money in construction, and you have to teach. You have to be a teacher.
Did Joel Lehman work on that case with you?
He did. Joel did the majority of the legal work and was a great help on that case.
Was it with CSX? Any notable trials?
Well, you and I had some notable.
It's about time you
cases.
talked about me.
You and I went to Chattanooga and tried, I think, one of the first of the solvent cases to be tried. And those were hard cases. They were cases, as you know, where the allegation was, I think our firm handled 200 or so of these cases. The allegation was that the use of trichloroethane and trichloroethylene caused a subtle form of brain damage over time to rail workers in the shops. And our belief was that that was baloney, that these men weren't brain damaged. And we finally, I think I tried one with Lynn Robbins here in Nashville, and then you and I went to Chattanooga and tried a 2.5 week case that we won there also. And we got off to a really good start. That passage in my career took about 12 years, I think.
One great story that came out of that, it's a case we worked on together, but we didn't try it together, is there was a verdict in Chattanooga against CSX that the Tennessee Court of Appeals affirmed, and the Tennessee Supreme Court refused to hear.
Yep.
What happened at the United States Supreme Court?
Well, you know this case as well as I do. We both knew that someday we were going to get hit, and we really got hit for several million in that case, because juries really are scared about brain damage, and we tried it. And you're right, the Court of Appeals kind of just dismissed the matter, and the Supreme Court wouldn't even accept the appeal. So we got a Washington, D.C. law firm that was outstanding, and they looked at everything and they said, I don't think there's anything in here that the Supreme Court's going to be interested in hearing, except that you had a count in the lawsuit that there was also recovery on for asbestos. And you had asked, I don't think it was me that thought of this, you had asked the judge to charge the jury about the level of proof required to recover for fear of asbestos. And the judge had refused to give that charge, even though in dicta, the Supreme Court had already said, you need to give this charge. It's got to be a serious fear. She refused, and the lawyer in Washington said, I think they might be interested in that. They filed a petition to have the Supreme Court accept certiorari. And one day in early June, I walked into the office. It was going to be a routine everyday day, and I walked past my secretary, Kim Williams. I said, Kim, how you doing? She said, fine. She said, there's something on your desk that I think you're going to like. And I walked in, and there was a little pamphlet there, and it was an opinion by the Supreme Court without ever hearing the case at all, only on the briefs, reversing and remanding the case for a new trial on the basis that the charge was not given on asbestos. So that was one of the great days of my life. It was just like a bolt of lightning, and 1,000,000 pounds had come off my shoulders.
How's the practice of law changed since you started till today?
You know, I guess the things that I think about are the speed of law practice. I think you communicate much more quickly. You use email these days. I think that there is more commoditization, unfortunately, in practice. Some clients, especially big clients, I believe sort of take the attitude that quality of your work doesn't count nearly so much as your billing rate. And that hurts, I think, the level of practice and what you get. It's something that I'm not really fond of, but I think it's there. I think that a big plus has been mediation. You know, I would never have had the legal career I've had and the fun I've had trying cases if mediation had been as prevalent when I began, because you just basically tried lawsuits. And you know, nowadays that if you can't work it out otherwise, you can mediate it, and it's proved to be a very good way to settle matters short of court.
I'm gonna move to a different topic in just a second. Anything else about the time at Gullett and Sanford? It's been what, 30 years?
Yeah, it's been about 30 years here. It's hard to believe.
Ever really anything else about those 30 years that stand out that you'd like to talk about?
You know, I guess the only thing is that I was just very lucky. I have had the opportunity over, 45 or more years of practicing with lawyers I really like. And I mean, when I think back about it, gee, how fortunate can you be? Because Gullett and Sanford is a firm where it's not really a sweat box, but on the other hand, everybody's is because they have to be as self-starters. And everybody takes care of their work. They're honest. They're good people, and I have just enjoyed it immensely. And you and Mary Taylor and all the younger lawyers that came along afterwards have made me feel good about.
We're not younger anymore.
I've been there.
Judges, you just talked about 45 years.
Yeah.
You've talked some about Clore Morton. Who are some of the other judges that have really stood out over your career?
There was a time when we had 3 of the greatest chancellors in the world. We still do have great chancellors, but at one time we had Bob Brandt. And I can't really say that Bob, even though he's a dear friend, was one of them, because Bob wouldn't try my cases. He tried one and ruled against me, and then later we had lunch and he said, "Did you feel awkward?" And I said, "I felt really awkward." And he just, after then, he would not hear any of my cases. But Allen High was a really fine chancellor, and Irvin Gilcrease was another one. And both of those I was really fond of, and I liked them. There was a chancellor in Warren County where I used to try a lot of cases, because of my experience early on in Warren County. I got to know lawyers there, and they would refer cases. And his name was Frick Stewart. And I tried 2 or 3 cases with him, and I thought he was about as good a law judge as I've ever experienced. So those, along with Clore Morton and some of the others, are just great judges that stand out.
What, if any, changes other than just growing have you seen in the local bar over your career?
We're lucky. I see that the bar is still vibrant. It still has good people who are willing to do volunteer work with the bar. So, Chris, I'm not sure. It's impossible to grow as Nashville's grown without having it difficult to know all the people that practice in Nashville. Now, I regret that, but it's just true.
You've always, since I've known you, been very active at the local bar level.
Yeah.
What are some of the offices you've held?
I've been on the board of directors twice, and the second time I was president of the bar in the millennial year in 2000, and I loved that. That was a great experience. Since then, I've stayed active, and I do a lot of work with the historical committee that you're representing today. I don't know why, but I really like lawyers, and I like working for the bar.
I guess you were the bar's general counsel for a while, weren't you?
I forgot about that. I was. Didn't have many lawsuits, thank heavens.
That's right. The state bar, did you hold any offices? Were you ever as active with the state bar?
I never, I just, by the luck of the draw, it seemed like that I got more active in the Nashville bar. I used to go with Mr. Dodson and Mr. Harris because Mr. Dodson was president of the Tennessee bar. And I would go to meetings there, and they would have a gathering, which you'd love, of all the railroad lawyers from Tennessee while you were at the bar, and they would have a big dinner. But I didn't stay as active in the TBA.
We know about Mr. Hooker and Mr. Dodson and gave you your first job. Heard about Mr. Neal while you were in law school. Who were some other folks that had an impact on your career through the years? Other lawyers?
Well, it seemed like that I had an awful lot of cases with Bob Walker and Bassbury and Sims. And they were tough advocates. And I think that improved my practice a lot. Frank Orell, Dick Lodge, Tony McFarland. I tried cases with all of those guys. The Miss Winters franchise cases, I tried those with Dick and Tony. And I really came to not only like Bassbury and Sims lawyers, but admire them because that's a much bigger firm, and they're really quality lawyers.
And now you're helping mentor Tony McFarland's son.
That's right. That's right.
Who are some of the lawyers? I mean, you've been doing this for 45 years. Who are some of the associates that have worked for you over the years?
Well, you and Mary Taylor are very prominent in that because you both helped me make it through the solvent years when you're handling as many cases as we were, just keeping your head above the water is hard to do, and you have been a big part of why I feel good about, headed for retirement, because I really wanted this firm to be strong when I left it, and I think that's where it is. But all the people here are good people. They really are, and I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed it immensely.
What do you see retirement looking like for you?
It's going to be a lot more Boy Scouts. I've been involved as a scoutmaster and assistant scoutmaster all of my adult life. I was an Eagle Scout. My dad was not an outdoor person. As a matter of fact, he had polio. So he got me involved in Boy Scouting when I was a young boy, and that was my window to the outdoors, Chris. And so when I got through with college, got married, and came back to Nashville, I looked for an opportunity to start a Boy Scout troop and got it at St. David's Episcopal Church. And I was Scoutmaster there for 25 years and then Assistant Scoutmaster for, golly, about 15 or 20 more. And now I'm working with Troop 11 here in Nashville. And we've taken scouts all over the country on backpacking trips. We've been to the Tetons, Idaho, the White Cloud Wilderness. We've been to the Waymanoosh in Colorado. Twice with the glacier. It's the Boy Scouts, I think, is going to take a lot of my time.
Well, it's not just Boy Scouts. You take lawyers backpacking, don't you?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. You've been with us. We've got a group of lawyers and both from Nashville and Knoxville and Clarksville who have been backpacking together. Scott Derrick, Jerry Lee, Bob Brandt, for years and years. And we'll go 3 or 4 times a year backpacking somewhere. And it's been a close group of friends. And I really enjoy that. I enjoy the outdoors a lot. So, yeah.
Do you think you'll remain active with the bar?
I think so. I mean, just doing what we're doing now, helping with histories of lawyers and things like that, I'm going to try to stay active with the bar. I've enjoyed doing a lot of work for the church, and I'm going to continue to do that.
Well, that's the next thing I was going to talk about. Just observing over the years, it seems like a lot of your donated time has been to Boy Scouts and the church, and I think you've seen some interesting changes in the Episcopal Church over the years.
We have. I think in 1995, Bishop Herlong asked me to be Vice Chancellor, and I served along with my dear friend David Herbert, who was Chancellor then. And then when Bishop Bowerschmidt came in 2007 to the Diocese of Tennessee, David retired, and since then I've been Chancellor for the Diocese of Tennessee. And that's just a gussied up word for the lawyer who represents the bishop and the diocese.
I'm going to ask you, a lot of this has been really pleasant questions, nice to think back on. What's the hardest thing you had to do? What was your toughest day as a lawyer?
There've been some tough ones. I mean, driving back from Chattanooga after we took a $1 million whipping in a solving case was really a gloomy. I hate to lose. I think all trial lawyers basically just hate to lose. But that was probably one of the sadder ones. I was very sad about the dissolution of Hooker Keeble, but again, I got very lucky, and it led to another career here that has been a really good one. A really good one.
What changes over your career have you observed about the public's perception of lawyers and lawyers' roles in public life?
Well, I disagree with the Supreme Court about lawyer advertising. I still don't think it's a good thing. I think probably I'm in a minority. But I think that because of the type of ads we've come to, and we came to pretty lousy ads really early. It didn't take, more than a couple of years. I think that has, in my view, that has hurt the status of lawyers because I think you're no longer professional. You're just another guy out trying to sell a pizza, and that's not the way I like to look at practice, but I realize you can look at it that way.
What are some of your best days, the best moments you've had as a lawyer?
Every jury verdict I ever got was the best moment of my life. And I'm serious. There is, and you can talk, and you know this yourself. You can talk to lawyers who try cases, and they can't say why. I couldn't tell you exactly why the high, but it's almost like a validation of you, when the jury comes back and rules for you, and if they rule against you, it's just like they've told you you're a bum.
I'm going to ask you a question about the Hatton trial. Do you remember when we were standing waiting for the jury to come back in and they walked in and the one dude winked at us and we didn't know if he was for us or if he was killing us?
I know. And our judge still laughs today about the reaction you and I had after that.
Do you still enjoy practicing law?
I do. There's some things that I still feel very good about doing, that I enjoy doing. There's some things that I know it's time for me not to do anymore. But I think every lawyer reaches that point where you've got to back away from certain things because you're either not as acute as you used to be or don't have the energy that you got to have to do them.
If Jim Neal was in this room right now, and we've talked about how you wanted to be a journalist, and then he convinced you to come work in a law firm, what would you say to him?
I've already told him, thank you.
It was
really
the right...
did. He was really kind to give me that opportunity, and you never know, but I have a feeling it was a pretty pivotal item in my life because it opened up law practice as a profession.
Give you a chance. I've got one last question, but before I ask that, I'm going to give you a chance. We got plenty of time. Is there anything that you'd like to talk about, any areas you'd like to cover that we haven't?
I think you've done a great job. I don't have anything else that...
Well, before I get to my last question, I just want to tell you you have been a great mentor in my life, and you've had a tremendous impact on it, and I appreciate everything you've done for me.
Well, thank you.
So the question that we've got is, can you show us the proper way to drink a single malt scotch?
Well, have you got a single malt scotch here?
It turns out we do.
Oh.
It also turns out that we have lime and water. So,
one of the great pleasures that God allowed for the human race was single malt scotch. And as soon as the camera goes off, I'm probably going to pour one. I won't keep.
All right.
I won't keep our video.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. This was a great time.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.